Welcome to tonight's America at a Crossroads conversation with Congressman Adam Schiff and Madeleine Brand. This event is presented by Jews United for Democracy and Justice and Community Advocates, Inc. I want to thank our leadership team, the incomparable Janice Kaminer-Resnick, the indefatigable David Lair, Mel Levine, Rabbi Ken Chasen. I also want to thank our sponsors, Temple Isaiah, Stephen Wise Temple, Valley Beth Shalom, Temple Beth Am, Leo Beck Temple, Ikar, Temple Israel of Hollywood, Jewish Center for Justice, the Holocaust Museum of LA, the Forward, and the Pico Union Project. Thanks to you, our audience, for making these Wednesday evenings a permanent entry on your calendars. We thank you for your attendance and your financial contributions. If you feel moved to support this completely volunteer operation, please do so. Information is available on the email you'll receive immediately upon the conclusion of this program. Tonight's conversation is being recorded by C-SPAN and covered by KCBS KCAL television here in Los Angeles. It's a sign of the extent to which these forums have impacted the public square. I want to briefly remind the audience of our future conversations. Next Wednesday, we will host the legendary Leon Panetta, former director of the CIA, Presidential Chief of Staff, and Secretary of Defense, in conversation with Larry Mandel. This discussion will focus on challenges related to presidential transitions, which will be a very timely subject. On Tuesday, and I emphasize Tuesday, this is the one time we're going on Tuesday, December the 15th, we have an extraordinary panel who will discuss, after 4 years of division, tension, and bigotry, now what? Our panel will include Jonathan Greenblatt of the Anti-Defamation League, Kathy Ko Chin of the Asian and Pacific Islander American Health Forum, Salam Al-Mariyati from the Muslim Public Affairs Council, Derek Johnson of the NAACP, and Cindy Benavides of the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC. The panel will be moderated by our own David Lair. On December 23rd, we will once again welcome Brett Stevens of the New York Times in conversation with Henry Weinstein on the topic, after 4 years of Trump, can we be healed? And finally, we will start our 2021 programming on January the 6th, a Wednesday night at 5 p.m. Los Angeles time, with the outstanding duo of Susan Glazer and the New Yorker and Peter Baker of the New York Times. Both of them have co-authored an important book. They'll be here on January the 6th. Now, to introduce tonight's guest, it's my privilege to welcome Mel Levine. Mel is a retired member of the United States Congress, former chair of the Los Angeles Water and Power Commission, a successful lawyer, a civic leader, and above all, my good friend. Mel, take it, it's all yours.
Thank you, my good friend Zev. It's a real pleasure to be able to join you, and it's a real pleasure to be able to introduce someone who I've been very fond of for many years, Congressman Adam Schiff. When I first met Adam over 20 years ago, I would say he was an earnest, substantive, hardworking, thoughtful, smart, somewhat wonky legislator. 20 or more years later, he still has all of those attributes, but in the past few years, America has seen Adam deploy those attributes with extraordinary skill to the not insignificant task of preserving American democracy. His leadership, lawyering, eloquence as chair of the House Committee on Intelligence, these attributes of Adam's, particularly in the necessary impeachment of Donald Trump, will be required material in American legal and history classes in the future. And future students of history will find it astonishing that Adam's arguments did not lead the Senate to convict Donald Trump. So we are all so fortunate that the Times have found Adam in the position he holds, and we're delighted to have him with us tonight. Interviewing Adam will be Madeleine Brand, who's returning to our Wednesday night programs. Madeleine is the host of the award-winning daily news and culture show, Press Play. On the show, she covers national, international, and local stories through a Southern California lens. She is also the co-host of KCRW's legal affairs podcast, The Legal Eagle Files. Madeleine has hosted and reported for NPR and for affiliate stations for more than 30 years, and along the way, she has earned many important awards, for her excellence in broadcast journalism. She has a master's degree from the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism, where she taught documentary radio, and her undergraduate degree is from the University of California at Berkeley, where she graduated with honors in English. I say to her, go Bears, and I turn it over to Madeleine to interview Congressman Schiff.
Okay, thank you so much for that introduction, Mel. I appreciate that. And yes, go Bears. Well, tonight's discussion is billed as a preview of the new Congress, which we are definitely going to get to, and your priorities, Congressman. But there's a lot to discuss, as usual, in the news. And I want to begin with news that broke yesterday with the Justice Department investigating an alleged bribery scheme and a presidential pardon. The unsealed court documents alleging that representatives for someone imprisoned may have discussed a possible pardon in exchange for donating to a political campaign. Do you know anything more about this, and who do you think this imprisoned person may be?
Well, first of all, Madeleine, thank you for moderating the discussion tonight. And Mel, I greatly appreciate those very kind remarks. I do have to take issue, though, with you and Madeleine about the whole Go Bears thing. And I will just refer you to the big game that just took place and Stanford's incredible victory. But I probably shouldn't say that before we have the discussion. I'll get a lot more difficult questions as a result.
Exactly.
But Janice and David, thank you so much, and Zev for introducing me and helping put the program together tonight. In terms of what to make of this court filing, most of the filing is redacted, so we can't see who the parties are, but there are some telltale signs. A lot of the discussion in the pleading is about attorney-client privilege and whether this person of interest is, and their communications are covered by that privilege. And the court essentially says, no, they're not. This person is not acting as an attorney, and what's more, that privilege doesn't protect you if you're engaged in some kind of criminal activity. So it appears that someone is in custody. Someone has an attorney who may be an interlocutor in trying to get the pardon. There was some plotting to make a sizable contribution to either the Trump campaign or a GOP organization in exchange for the pardon. How far advanced that plot was, we don't know. Whether the president was even aware of the plot, we don't know. But one thing you can, I think, presume, and that is that someone amidst this cast of characters in the redacted parts of the pleading, someone must have a high enough connection to the president or people around the president where it was believed or believable that they could deliver on their end of the bribe. That is, they could deliver a pardon. So obviously much more to learn, but that's as much as I can tell from what we've seen so far.
Well, it does come as we are hearing about other possible pardons. Possibly the president might pardon Rudy Giuliani. He might preemptively pardon, Giuliani preemptively pardon him, as well as three of his adult children. So what do you make of that, and whether or not it is possible legally and, of course, politically to preemptively pardon these people?
Well, to paraphrase the expression that's used in computer data, corruption in, corruption out. If your input is corruption, your output is corruption. And, this group that the president has surrounded himself, to include the president, have acted during their course of the last 4 years like an organized crime family. And on the way out, it's no different. The president is looking to protect people who have protected him, in some cases by lying to cover up for him. People like Roger Stone, who we already commuted the sentence of, and people like Mike Flynn, who we already pardoned, but others as well, like Rudy Giuliani. Giuliani was seeking foreign help in the presidential campaign, something that's unlawful. He was seeking to have Ukraine help smear Joe Biden. And what's more, Rudy Giuliani appears to be one of the last standing who is still willing to put forward these patently false claims about the election. And it seems so apparent that what Rudy Giuliani is really doing is he is pleading for a pardon. And from the reporting, he may very well get it. Now, is there any remedy for that kind of a corrupt use of a pardon? Unless it's part of an explicit bribe, like that other case refers to, there's probably no remedy. Now, I think in terms of the president's children, it's a little closer question, because the Constitution, while it doesn't explicitly put a limit on pardons, other parts of the Constitution also require the president to faithfully execute the laws. And if the president is furthering a violation of those laws, is engaging in corrupt conduct with his family, then there will be a very pointed legal question about whether that pardon is effective. It's even more dubious in the case of a self-pardon. I feel very strongly that a self-pardon by the president, that is Donald Trump trying to pardon himself in advance, would be constitutionally unsustainable. And the way that would be tested is if, for example, when he left office, the Southern District of New York decided to move forward with the prosecution of individual one, that person already mentioned in a complaint that organized and directed a campaign fraud scheme involving Michael Cohen, for which he went to jail. The Trump defense would argue that his pardon should protect him, and it would go all the way up to the Supreme Court. But I do think that the Supreme Court is likely to conclude, similar to what the Justice Department Office of Legal Counsel found in 1974, that you can't be the judge in your own case, you can't be above the law, and what's more, the Constitution isn't a suicide pact. And if you allow a president to engage in illegality or direct others to engage in illegality and merely pardon themselves, then it would nullify whole other sections of the Constitution. And I don't think any court ought to interpret it that way.
I mean, anything could happen, as we've seen in the last 4 years. So would it be conceivable that under the 25th Amendment, he could abdicate to Pence and Pence could pardon him in the final days of the administration?
You know, that would actually be a cleaner way for him to try to go about insulating himself from prosecution. But I don't think he will do it, for the reason that I don't think his ego would allow him to see Mike Pence president even for a single day, and even for the purpose of pardoning him. One of the things he loves about the pardon power is that he can do it on his own. He doesn't need anybody else to do it. And so I think it's much easier to imagine a president as corrupt as this one pardoning himself, but I don't see a president as vain as this one stepping down even for a day to allow the vice president to do it.
Well, would that be something, if he did engage in these pardons, something that congressional committees would investigate next year?
Well, you know, it depends on the particular pardon. I mean, certainly if there was evidence that a pardon was given as part of a bribery scheme, that's something that the Congress and the Justice Department ought to find out and expose. If it is, some other kind of a pardon that is just an abuse of power, that may not call for any investigation, but it does call for a legislative remedy. And I've introduced a bill called the Pro-Democracy Act that covers a whole spectrum of misconduct we've seen over the last 4 years, but in particular with the pardon power, it would put Congress on record saying you can't pardon yourself. That would be null and void. What's more, if you pardon a member of your family, then all the investigative files in any investigation of your family would be provided to Congress. So Congress can determine, are you trying to obstruct justice in ways that are not apparent to the public? And also the legislation would make clear that if you give a pardon as part of a bribery scheme, you can be prosecuted for it. And no pardon can protect you from that. So it goes about as far as we feel that we can legally and constitutionally go to disincentivize and curb the abuse of pardons, and that is an appropriate role for the Congress.
Well, as you mentioned, he did pardon Michael Flynn and commuted Roger Stone's sentence. And given how long you and your committee investigated them, among others, not to mention the amount of time, money, and effort that went into the Mueller investigation, what is your reaction? Is it frustrating to see at least a partial waste of your time, money, and effort when these people are just easily pardoned or their sentences commuted?
You know, I struggle to characterize, the feeling, when I witness these things. It really isn't as much frustration, frankly, as it is despair about what he's doing to the country. I mean, it's corruption in your face. I can't imagine another circumstance where a president of the United States would believe they could pardon someone who so clearly lied on their behalf. And they don't even dispute that Roger Stone, for example, lied. They tried to dispute that Michael Flynn lied, but Michael Flynn admitted twice under oath to lying. And so, the idea that you could reward people who lie for you by pardoning them, that you could threaten people who testify or potentially testify against you. You recall the president calling Michael Cohen a rat, and of course, the president urging Bill Barr to investigate all of his enemies. These are just terrible, bring about a terrible destruction of the independence of the justice system, of the Justice Department, and doing just immeasurable damage to our democracy. And that's what really grieves me. The loss of time in terms of investigating Roger Stone's misconduct. Look, I think we exposed it to the American people, whatever sentence he may serve or not serve. But the damage that Trump is doing to our whole democracy will be very long lasting.
Do you think, well, how long lasting do you think? I mean, is it recoverable in the next 4 years, or is there going to be a permanent shift, a permanent diminution of democracy and norms?
Some things will be long lasting, if not permanent. Many things can be mitigated and will be mitigated by a new administration. But in terms of can it all be done in 4 years, if, as it appears, Donald Trump intends to continue from the sidelines, dominating the Republican Party, then the ability to mitigate the harms is seriously undermined. One of the things that has made the president's misconduct possible, one of the reasons that the president can even contemplate pardoning himself or his family, is that Republicans in the House and Senate are willing to go along with him. The fact that the president could usurp the Congress's power of the purse to take money that Congress appropriated to the military and divert it to build a wall that Congress wouldn't fund. That would never take place if Congress said no. But the GOP in Congress has become nothing more than a cult of the president. If you look at the very stirring statement, I think that probably most of our viewers tonight witnessed, of this Georgia election official talking about how, young people, working in the elections for, the software vendor for a voting technology, or in his own office, are threatened with violence, and how it's too much, it's got to stop, and people who are being silent are complicit. I was glad to hear him say it, but I have to say that a lot of the folks who are speaking out like he is were complicit themselves when those threats were directed at others. And the fact that there has been this pervasive silence in the face of the most egregious trampling of our democratic norms, if it continues because Trump is, hectoring from the sidelines, then it's going to take us that much longer to recover.
Mm. On the other hand, judges pretty much uniformly, and many judges who Trump appointed or who are conservative, in particular, Stephanos Bibas, who is on the, I think the Third Circuit in Philadelphia, very scathing opinions in the cases that the Trump campaign is bringing to invalidate the votes in various states. And so I guess I'm wondering if you're surprised that the system is holding as well as it is, at least the judicial system, when a lot of Democrats feared it wouldn't.
Well, I think that the judiciary has essentially held the line in a way that's been very important. Now, there have been cracks within the judiciary as well. I think we are seeing a level of partisanship within the judiciary that we haven't seen to this degree before, where increasingly decisions come down on the basis of the party of the president who appointed them. So you can often predict when something goes before a three-judge panel. And we would see this, for example, in the litigation that we had to enforce subpoenas for Don McGahn to testify or to obtain Deutsche Bank records, where a district court judge appointed by a Republican president would rule for Donald Trump, and one appointed by a Democratic president would rule in favor of the Congress. And we see that, I think, to an increasing and potentially dangerous degree. But nonetheless, you're right. There have been very notable departures, and some of the most scathing opinions in these election fraud baseless cases have been from either Trump appointed judges or judges appointed by other Republican presidents. I'm not surprised that the judiciary has held. I am surprised and discouraged that so many other institutions have failed and have failed because Republicans in the Congress would not do their constitutional duty. The degree to which the Justice Department was allowed to be politicized surprises me and shocks me. The degree to which the president with impunity could violate the Hatch Act and hold a political convention on the White House grounds. The degree to which his abuse of the pardon power would be either countenanced or met with silence among Republicans. But most egregious, this attack on the peaceful transition of power, the press, not even press conference, the video recording the president released today with a lengthy and completely fallacious recitation about the election and met with silence. The president not accepting the results of the election met with silence. I am shocked by that. I had thought more highly of my colleagues, and that has been a grave disappointment.
Have you been able to talk with them? You're at the Capitol now, buttonhole them privately outside the glare of media and everything else and say, what are you thinking?
Yes, although I have to say that the pandemic has made that much more difficult. There's not much buttonholing going on when you can't get close to the buttons. Certainly over time, continuing to the president, Republicans have expressed their deep and private misgivings, but frankly, I long since gave up having any favor when it comes to private confessions of unease. If you're not willing to speak out, if you're not willing to act out with your vote, then the private misgivings are meaningless.
So what do you think this will mean, and what effect will it have on the Biden presidency and how effective it can be?
Well, first of all, and I know my presentation so far has been not a very uplifting one. It is a remarkable feat that, notwithstanding all of those limitations we're dealing with, and notwithstanding the fact that we were in the midst of a terrible pandemic and still are, massive numbers of Americans went out to vote. They were not discouraged, and indeed, they were more determined than ever to go and vote. And so that is a resounding success and a very important one. So, I want to look on the bright side of things as well. And frankly, it was a sizable repudiation of Donald Trump and what he stands for. Not as sizable as I would have liked, but nonetheless, a massive popular vote victory for Joe Biden and a very substantial electoral college victory. Now, what will that mean for Joe Biden going forward? I think if there's anyone who was made for this hour, it's Joe Biden. If there's anyone that could come to office with a wellspring of good faith, with an inherent decency, who understands the institutions of Congress where he served for so long, and with a natural inclination to heal, having suffered great loss himself, it's Joe Biden. Now, he's going to need every bit of that experience and talent because Mitch McConnell's coming from a very different place. But I do think that he has the chance to bring the country together. And I know he will make every effort to do so. And he has the chance to be successful legislatively because he has relationships on the Hill. He knows how the Hill works. And he will work it. He won't be out on the golf course when he should be working with Congress to get a relief package done. So I have high, but I hope realistic expectations.
Well, speaking of relief packages, it's been, they've been dead in the water for a while now. What makes you think that Biden and new administration will be more successful with Mitch McConnell in getting him to agree to a substantial relief package?
Well, first of all, I'm increasingly encouraged that we may get a package done even before Joe Biden takes office. There is a bipartisan package that was put together by a number of Democratic and GOP members of the Senate and some in the House. And the Democratic leadership in both houses now has said, let's use that as our starting point for negotiation. And I think that's a very positive sign. Now, Mitch McConnell isn't on board yet, but some of his Republican members are. And so I think we are closer than we've ever been. And I also agree with the sentiment, although that package is much less than I think is necessary, that getting something done sooner may be even more important at this point than getting something done later, even if it's larger. So it's my hope that within the next 10 days, as we take up a bill to keep the government open, that we will append to that a relief bill for the American people that will help people on unemployment and people who are small business owners who, frankly, there are millions of them who won't be around. Their businesses won't be around in late January when Joe Biden takes office if we don't act now. I do think, though, that whatever we get done in this lame duck is only going to be the beginning. And the Biden administration, I think, has already indicated, and quite appropriately, they're going to need to come back to Congress for a lot more. Look, if you bet against the Congress, 99% of the time you'd win your bet. And it won't be easy for the Biden administration to get another relief package done, but the need is there. I wouldn't want to be Mitch McConnell and getting in the way of that need. So he'll have a lot of Republican senators to defend 2 years from now, something he is already thinking about. And I wouldn't want to face voters having rejected help when they needed it.
But he already has, and he won handily. He won re-election handily in Kentucky. It wasn't even close. And he had already said no to relief packages. So, I mean.
That's true. But he will not have the advantage in 2 years that he had 2 or 3 or 4 weeks ago. And that is, he won't have Donald Trump ginning up the turnout of his base. And so I don't think he can count on that undercurrent to carry the day the way he was fortunate to have been able to rely on this time.
Well, he might if Donald Trump runs 4 years from now, which he said he
well, he might on the ballot in 4 years if that's the case, but he won't have that in 2 years. And
Right.
So, those very occasional voters who turned out for Donald Trump may not turn out for Mitch McConnell. And they may be even less likely to turn out for him if he's been standing in the way of their getting the help they need.
The Democrats suffered a big loss. Of course, they still hold the House, but they expected to gain a lot more seats and not lose as many as they did, and also had hoped to win back the Senate easily. And I guess pinning the hopes on Georgia, that seems like an uphill battle. What did the Democrats do wrong in this election?
Well, I think that this was, whether we liked it or not, a referendum on Donald Trump. People turned out to vote for him and they turned out to vote against him. And most Americans were simply not willing to split the ticket. This has been an increasing trend, frankly, even before Donald Trump, but it has been dramatically accentuated during the Trump years. And that is, people are voting party line. We are becoming even more tribalized. Part of that is now how we get our information. And this may be one of the biggest challenges that we face as a country. We just don't get the same, we don't get the same information anymore. We don't get it from the same places anymore. And So I think what we saw happen is that in rare cases where someone could make the compelling argument why a voter should split the ticket, they weren't willing to do it. And that meant for Senate Democratic challengers, for example, who hadn't held that office, it was much harder to make that case. And the same was true in the House. Our House challengers, by and large, lost. They didn't have the track record to show why voters should split their ticket in those Trump districts. There were a number of Democratic incumbents in Trump districts who did buck the odds. And I think because they had time in office to show voters why they should cross party lines and support them. So I don't know that it's easily characterized as something that Democrats did wrong or Republicans did right. I do think that one thing Democrats are going to need to do is win back working families. We have always been the party of working families, but not all working families realize this. And it's on us to make that case. And I think that given that many people somehow separated the economic straits they're in from the president's disastrous handling of the pandemic, that was a case we should have been able to make much more effectively. He inherited a good economy. It remained good until he destroyed it by his inept handling of the pandemic. We needed to make that case apparently better than we did. And what's more, I think it's incumbent on the Democratic Party, frankly, it's incumbent on both parties, if we're going to continue to enjoy a prosperity that we have in the past and pass it on to our children and their children, that we come up with solutions for an economy that is simply not working for millions of Americans. There are hugely disruptive economic forces afoot in terms of globalization and automation that have caused millions to lose their jobs through no fault of their own. And many communities across the country to be hollowed out. And I think it really needs to be our policy. We leave no community behind. We leave no family behind. And that we make sure the economy works for every part of America. That to me is a populist message, but it's also a very progressive message. It's not a you're failing because someone else is succeeding and that someone else doesn't come from this country. It's a message that says we're all in this together. We're going to make sure the economy works for everyone, that there's opportunity for everyone. That I think really needs to be the core both policy agenda for the Democratic Party as well as message for the Democratic Party.
Right, but that would be in perhaps a longer time frame. In the short time frame, you, for example, would have a problem with switching from a coal-based economy to a renewable fuel-based economy, and that would hurt a lot of people in West Virginia and places like that. And you heard Joe Biden, double down on his support for fracking. That is very divisive within the Democratic Party, and so. I think it might be quite difficult to, in practice, bring everyone together on the same page when it comes to issues like that, like where the jobs will come from when people are hurting in blue collar sectors of the country.
Well, look, we're a big tent party and we have a choice of being a big tent party in the majority or being a small tent in the minority. And so there are going to be divergences of opinion on things like fracking. But I think there are ways to win over communities across America. It comes from, frankly, being there, having the conversations in person. You can't, I think, lecture from 1,000 miles away or 3,000 miles away about what kind of jobs people should have. You have to have a dialogue with people. You have to find out, what their needs and interests and desires are. You can't certainly tell people that their community is a casualty and they need to move somewhere else. That's not an adequate answer. And so I think the challenge in parts of the country that rely on coal as part of their economy is to be able to make the case for how people can be employed, ask them what kind of jobs they want to have. If those jobs, by nature of the global economy, aren't going to be there in the future, what kind of a future do they want for their kids? How do we make that possible? How do we work together to achieve that? How do we make sure that their kids get the education that they need, that they're not saddled with debt that prevents them from having opportunity? How do we make sure that there's a climate in which companies will relocate in all parts of the country? So, those are, I think, the challenges that I think can be met. But yes, there's going to be divergences on particular policy interests. And as long as Joe Biden is the president, he will be, for the Democratic Party, setting the agenda.
You became a Democratic star in the last several years as President Trump's lead antagonist and manager of the impeachment hearings. You even got an insulting nickname, so there's a bona fide. Trump no doubt raised your political profile. Was he good for your career?
I guess we'll have to wait to make that determination in hindsight. I would gladly trade any, Democratic stardom, as you put it, for not having to have to go through the last 4 years of what this country went through. I certainly didn't relish the responsibilities that I had. I would much rather that it was not necessary to investigate or impeach a president. But I am grateful for this, and that is that, at a time when I think our democracy was at its greatest peril, I was in a position to do something. I'm grateful for that. I think it's been enormously frustrating for millions of Americans to feel powerless as they watch the news to do anything. Now, in fact, we all have the ability to affect the course of the country, and people showed that by turning out in tremendous numbers to vote, and the millions and millions of people that got involved in registering people to vote and doing Zoom conferences and texting campaigns and emailing campaigns and phone banking. So everyone found a way they could contribute. And to me, that was very important, that I had a position where I could make a difference, and I needed to rise to that challenge. And I hope I did, and I guess history will tell.
And are you thinking of possibly looking for another job, perhaps in the Senate? We do have a Senate seat open here in California.
Well, I think, as Mel can tell you, you'd be hard pressed to find a member of the House who doesn't look in the mirror and see a senator staring back. The governor would have very few to turn down an offer of a Senate position. But he also has a lot of great candidates. So I don't envy that choice, but I am confident he'll make a good decision.
Well, you raised what, $41 million this election cycle? That's a lot of money. So some of it could be for a future statewide run.
I had the opportunity to gather a lot of support from grassroots around the country, and to meet a number of our party's biggest supporters over the last several years. Frankly, I was most fortunate in very small dollar givers. I think our contribution was about $18 to $20. And I feel a big responsibility to those supporters to continue the work that they have encouraged me to do. In the new administration, I'm looking forward to passing legislation that will address so many of these attacks on our democracy. That really is one of my high priorities for the new session. Everyone's priority, first, second, and third, is going to be ending the pandemic and getting people the economic help they need. But the health of our democracy is also very important. And I look forward to working on those issues.
Okay, I'm now going to ask a few questions of you from the audience. There are many, many questions, and this is the time when we go to these questions. So let me begin with Eric, who asks, AOC is campaigning against Rahm Emanuel getting an appointment. Is there a looming danger from the left of the party to Biden's potential success?
I wouldn't say that there's a looming threat to Biden from any part of the Democratic Party. As we were talking about earlier in terms of fracking, we're a big tent. We have some very progressive members. We have some very moderate members. The thing that binds us together is much stronger than anything that divides the party. And my feeling is you tap the talents of every one of our members. They all have something to contribute. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is an incredibly talented person, very smart, very capable, an immense presence on social media, very energizing to young people in particular, but a lot of people who aren't young. She pushes the party to be more progressive. I think that's helpful. And the fact that so many people came out to vote, I think inspired by her, is a part of Joe Biden's success. But so too are those very moderate members that come from those very red districts. The Elaine Lurias and Abigail Spanbergers and Mikey Sherrills and Alyssa Slotkins and others who have demonstrated how Democrats can win in every part of the country. Both of those types of members and everyone in between contribute immeasurably to the party. If we're smart, we will see what they all have to offer. If we're not, we will look at what they take away. I'm just grateful we have such a capable speaker that has the ability to keep us rowing in the same direction. But I would expect that progressives will be urging the Biden administration to appoint a progressives, and moderates will be urging the same. And ultimately, Joe Biden will make those decisions. And I have to say, judging from the ones he's made already, they're making an awfully good group of decisions. It's a really talented new cabinet and staff. I think it's a very diverse group of people, both politically and ethnically and otherwise. And so he's off to a very good start.
What do you make of Nora Tandon at the OMB?
I know Nora very well. I think she's a brilliant woman. She's run a very progressive think tank in Washington. I think she's knowledgeable and capable. I know that some of my progressive friends don't like what she has to say on Twitter. But again, she has a lot of talent that she brings to the administration. And so I think she's a remarkably capable person, and any one of those talents should be utilized by our party if we're smart. And I fully expect the president is going to also choose people with impeccable progressive credentials. And so I think you're going to see a cabinet and other senior level officials within the Biden administration reflective of the political diversity of our party and the country.
But when you look at who his cabinet picks are so far, especially on the economic side, what do you see as his reading the tea leaves as how he is going to change economic policy? As we all know, we are in an economic crisis right now. A lot of people are really hurting. Do you think that looking at who he has picked so far, you can read any kind of policy change, major policy change in these choices?
I think, based on what he said during his campaign, what's in his platform and the choices he's made, you can gather a few things. One, in the choice of someone like Janet Yellen, that he realizes the limitations of what he's going to be able to do legislatively, and that it's going to be very important that the Fed be able to act also to help preserve an economic lifeline through this pandemic and help our economy come back. I think you can see from some of his other economic council appointments that he's bringing in some very progressive voices. He's bringing in some very experienced voices. I think he's going to be progressive economically, but I also think he's going to be well within the mainstream. When he talks, for example, about taxes and making sure that taxes don't go up on middle-class families, and he's got a pretty generous definition of middle class. then I think you get an idea of where he's likely to go in terms of legislating. So I would say that, moderate to progressive in his economic policies, making liberal use where he needs to of what he can do through executive order, encouraging of the Fed to do what they can if he runs into legislative roadblocks.
Possible for him to cancel student loan debt? Was that doable?
It is doable, and I think we will see some of that. Now, whether it will go as far as some of my colleagues would like or not, I don't know. My guess is that, consistent with who Joe Biden is, whatever he decides to do will be reasonable and responsible. But I do think that you could see very early on the president-elect taking action to cancel or forgive at least a certain portion of student debt.
Frank asks, will any relief package include retroactive payments for those of us who have been unemployed due to COVID?
It could. It could, in terms of unemployment compensation that was stopped when it ran out and then would begin again. It could be made retroactive. A lot will depend on what has been negotiated in this package and the changes that are made to it. I don't know, because we're just getting an idea of what's in this bipartisan proposal, whether there's retroactivity. It wouldn't surprise me if there is, but at the same time, when you reduce the amount you're willing to spend on relief, it's all a question of where you have to take it from. Do you take it from a less generous PPP program for small business? Do you take it from help for renters? Do you take it from unemployment compensation? Do you take it from help for states and local government and their ability to fund emergency providers? This is why these cuts are really brutal and painful. And from my point of view, we are already starting out too small to meet the size of the need. But we have made payments like that retroactive in the past, and we certainly may do so in this as well.
Richard asks, what do you think will happen in the 2 Georgia races next month?
I think it's going to be very close. It's really difficult to predict what the turnout will be when you don't have Donald Trump motivating people to turn out for or against him. Will it be, and this is what I hope and pray, a triumph of people like Stacey Abrams and their organizational efforts to register voters, engage voters, keep voters engaged, and keep them turning out? Will that prevail over a lethargic GOP effort in the midst of GOP fighting because the president doesn't like what the governor is doing, even though he's been a stalwart supporter of the president, and he doesn't like what the Secretary of State's doing because the Secretary of State's doing his job? Is that going to discourage Trump supporters and cause them to stay home? Really hard to say. Normally, a special election is favorable to the Republicans, but the conventional wisdom doesn't seem to apply in the Trump years. If the conventional wisdom had applied in the presidential election, we would have taken back the Senate. So I think it's going to be very close, and I'm certainly doing all I can to help both of our candidates.
Do you think, Robert asks, the Republican Senate will approve most of Biden's cabinet picks?
I do, because judging from the choices that the vice president has made so far, they're very mainstream choices, and I think they were chosen in part with an eye towards confirmation. So yes, I do, and that's not to say there won't be fights over certain of them, and the president-elect should choose the people that he wants and fight for them. But I do think that given the type of candidates he's chosen, that he will be successful in confirmations.
Okay, Avi asks, what do you think about returning to the Iran deal? Is it even possible after this assassination? That was my added question.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. And, the president-elect has indicated that he will seek to enter into the Iran nuclear deal again. Ideally, there may be an opportunity for the new administration not only to re-enter the deal, but to even go further. I think, frankly, it's going to be a challenge any way you slice it, because having set now the terrible precedent of abandoning an agreement that another nation was complying with, an agreement that we entered into multilaterally with allies as well, having unilaterally reneged on it, we set a precedent where other nations may not trust that any agreement they enter into the United States will survive that presidency. So, if Donald Trump announces on Joe Biden's inauguration day that he's running again in 4 years, then what confidence can any other country have, whether they are friend or foe, that any agreement will last more than 4 years? Now, that didn't used to be the case. Presidents really made an effort not to revisit the agreements reached by their predecessors, because America's word meant something. That's going to make Joe Biden's job very difficult. But there are also incentives to try to get to yes. Iran has gone back to enrichment. Iran's nuclear program is once again moving forward. They are getting far fewer of the sanctions and getting to rebuild their nuclear program. That is far from ideal. At the same time, their economy is in really desperate straits, so they have an incentive to come to the table. I think that Joe Biden will certainly make the effort to bring about a negotiated end to Iran's nuclear program, but it won't be easy.
Should there be some kind of repercussion from the United States? Should it be confirmed that Israel was behind that assassination?
Well, I don't. I don't know what I have to be careful about what I can say in terms of attribution, and so I guess all I would say is that I think the United States needs to make its own decision what's in its national interest in terms of the nuclear deal. We should be mindful of the impact on our allies, and in particular on Israel, which properly views Iran as an existential threat. But I think that the Biden administration should make an independent judgment of what's in the United States' best interest in terms of pursuing renewed agreement with Iran on the nuclear issue. And if that's in our national security interest, that should be our objective, regardless of anything that took place prior to that.
All right, we are almost at the end of our time together, and you have been given a couple of minutes for closing remarks, if you'd like to make them. The floor is yours.
Thank you again for the discussion tonight. It's wonderful to see you even in Zoom form. I want to say, because this has been such a tumultuous and difficult 4 years, that we do have the opportunity next month to begin a new year with a new administration in which the President of the United States is no longer determined to divide us at every opportunity, but rather we will have a President of the United States who is determined to unite us, to bring us together, to bring about national healing. And the president, to an extraordinary degree, and more so than any other American, has an ability to set the tone for the country. That could be for good or it can be for ill. For the last 4 years, it's been for ill. For the next 4, it will be for good. And we shouldn't underestimate just how much impact that can have. But even as the president-elect and soon to be President Biden and Kamala Harris work from the top to bring Congress together and bring the country together, I think all of us, have to work on a bottom-up approach. that begins at the level of neighborhood in trying to come together with our neighbors. The Trump presidency has not only divided the parties, obviously, but it's divided neighbors from neighbors, friends from friends, spouse from spouse. And we all have to do our part to try to heal and come together. So I'm an optimist by nature. If I wasn't, I couldn't do this job. And I know we will recover from this. The more we do and the sooner we do it, the faster we recover. But this too shall pass. We've been through other hard times in our nation's history. The pandemic will pass, life will go back to normal. And the bitter division of this period will also pass in time. So there are things to look forward to in the new year. And for me, the end of 2020 can't come quick enough.
Amen to that. I think we all feel that too. So that was a great ending thought. And thank you so much for being on this program. Thank you for returning. And thank you all for tuning in and spending this hour with us. Janice, David, Zev, and Mel, thank you for hosting this. And I just want to remind everyone that next week we'll have former Defense Secretary and CIA Director Leon Panetta on with Larry Mantle. And then the following week, we'll have a panel on civil rights here. And later in the month, Brett Stevens from the New York Times will be here. So again, thank you all very much. Thanks to the Congressman for his time, and have a great evening.